All right, hello and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the webinar, Material and Program Challenges in the Public Library. My name is Courtney Brown, and I'm the Southeast Regional Coordinator from the Indiana State Library's Professional Development Office. I'll be the host and question moderator today. Our presenters this morning are Juli Wald from Middlebury Public Library, Vanessa Martin from Greensburg-Decatur County Contractual Public Library, Heather McNabb from Evansville Vanderburgh Public Library, Brad Sowinski from Alexandria Monroe Public Library, and Cheri Harris from the Indiana State Library. Just a couple of announcements. To register for other webinars or other trainings available from the Professional Development Office, please see the Indiana State Library's events calendar, which can be found on our website at www.in.gov/library. For a full list of our current in-person training menu, please see our continuing education website. This session is eligible for LEUs. If you're watching an archived recording of this webinar, instructions on how to obtain your LEU are in the video's description on YouTube, where you can also find those instructions on the ISL's continuing education site under LEU policies. Without further ado, I'm going to turn this presentation over to our presenters, and we'll get started with Juli.
Good morning, everyone. I am Juli Wald. I'm the director of the Middlebury Public Library in Middlebury, Indiana, which is north central in the state, just about 7 miles south of the Michigan border. I'm going to kind of take you on an anecdotal year. I began my position as a new director in March of 2021. When I came on board, I had let my staff know that I'm progressive, that I'm open to their suggestions and their ideas. And within the first week that I was there, they let me know that they had already hoped to plan, or had already planned rather, Pride Month for June. And my staff works ahead and, a few months ahead. And so they had graphics ready and all this type of stuff. And I was like, yes, let's definitely do it. So in June, the Pride Month banner that you see there is what we had on our website. It was a part of the carousel of images that scrolled through on our website. We did not have any displays in our library. We didn't have any activities or programs or events that were related to Pride. It was really just an opportunity for us to share additional resources for people who are interested in learning more about Pride. It was the, an anniversary year and different things like that. And so we would, through this banner, we would direct people to additional reading. It took about 3 days before I had a parent come to me and introduce themselves and let me know that they were very upset to see Pride on the website, that they didn't think that it was something that their child should have to look at. And it wasn't something that they wanted to have to explain because they knew that their children were not aware of Pride. So that started, like I said, about 3 days in, started the conversations about this. It was mostly me receiving feedback from the community, which I welcomed as the new director. I thought it was a great opportunity to start to meet people. It was just a little contentious, which was not my preference. So in July, it was like, hello, community. We had about 50 to 60 people show up at our board meeting, and I was informed by our board that they've never had public comments. So yay me, we introduced this to our community and to our board. So we had about 50 to 60 people show up. It was a mix of supporters and people who were not pleased with our decision to post this. As a new member of the community myself, I had contacted 2 local churches. And when I called them, their pastors, I said that I wasn't seeking support. Instead, as a new member of the community, I was seeking advice on how to move forward, knowing that I was going to have more contentious conversations. Both of the pastors were very kind and very candid to let me know a little bit more about the community. They were pleased that we were pulling off that Band-Aid. This is something that has never happened in the library's 41 years of history, to acknowledge Pride. And so it was nice to get their support, but that wasn't what I was seeking. So come to find out that they had told their parishioners. And so at our board meetings, we had a pretty even divide of people who were there to support the library and people who were there to voice their opposition. They were fearful of the direction that we were taking, that we had an agenda. There's certain language and vocabulary that you kind of get used to hearing when you go through this. It was lovely. So even though it was contentious, we had people speak out. We had an 18-year-old girl who spoke out that she's bisexual and that she was happy that she received support from a few teachers at her school, and there was an organization at her school. And I had a gentleman who's 88 years old who said that we're having this conversation 30 years too late. We had people who were very fearful of an agenda, and I think a lot of that is from ignorance, and I mean that just in the way that they are not aware. These are not conversations that they've had. And this is kind of, they took it as though this was in their face. So a quick, abrupt stop for them. So July, August, September, October, we had continuous discussions at our board meetings, people preparing information that you could tell was shared with through organizations that they belong to. Because there was a lot of repeat conversation, people looking into statutes and different things like that to make sure that we were following the laws. October got a little heated, and this is where it got a little personal for me. People were out taking pictures of my car, talking about me through social media. I was that new director from Colorado. And no one had taken an opportunity to even introduce themselves to me. So I ended up calling the police after our October board meeting because I was in fear for my own safety. I was in fear for the safety of some of my staff. I, as well as about 3 others, identify as LGBTQIA. And so it became personal, even though I was trying to keep it at a very professional level. So things got quiet during the winter, and then in March, we surprisingly had 2 people show up at our board meeting who were there just as supporters. So now we're coming back up around June, and we will be posting Pride again, and we are anticipating more conversation. My greatest takeaway from this is that we have had this conversation. These are things that have not been discussed in an open forum. To my knowledge in this community. And as much as I did not intend to come in as a new director making waves, it's kind of what happened. The staff was amazingly supportive, and they were impacted by this as well. So it's been an interesting year, and I think that we'll be able to go into June this year feeling a little bit stronger.
Well, if I can get myself unmuted here. So I'm Vanessa Martin. I am the director at the Greensburg-Decatur County Public Library. And much of what I'm going to say mirrors what Juli has already said. I'm going to be speaking about our Pride Month display and the challenges that we faced. I hope I don't bore you with my story. It's kind of like a timeline. I think of it as a saga. Because our challenge, for lack of a better word, that's what I'm going to call it, lasted from June 2019 until February of 2020. The good thing is a little virus came along in March of 2020 and shut everything down, including our library. And that also shut down our guests from attending library board meetings. So a little background about our library is that we serve about 26,000 residents. We are a county contractual, so I have a large library board of 11 members, and we are also a conservative rural area. Change slide, please, Courtney. So my story. Once upon a time, a Pride Month display was set up on shelves at the entrance to our teen room. a prominent location, which is also across from our main circulation desk. The books were on top of the shelves that I circled there in yellow. So the teen studio and the adult area bump right up to each other. But the books that were on display were from our adult collection. So it started on June 11th. A patron submitted a complaint via the library's website. Her key points in her complaint were that she wanted to, quote, protect her children from this lifestyle that the library was now promoting, end quote. And she asked for us to take the display down. So I was out of the office at the time. So our public services manager, who also does collection development for the books that were on the display, she made the decision to move the books from the teen area to a shelving display unit, and she placed that near the entrance to the adult book area, also in the main walkway through the library. She then emailed the patron back. She thanked her for her concerns and let her know that we'd moved the display, but we were not taking it down. She also included the library's collection development policy in the ALA Bill of Rights, which explains that we collect materials on subject matter from all points of view. The patron was grateful for the reply, still respectfully disagreed with the choice to display the LGBTQ books, and politely declined coming to the library until the display was taken down. So we thought, hey, okay, we kind of solved that problem. Let's move on. But we were really wrong. Change slide, please. So that next day or that day, library staff were notified that there were pictures of the display and calls for the display to be taken down on a Facebook page. The post had been made public and there were many comments, both in support of taking the display down and also praise for the library for displaying books. There was another post a couple of days later on the same person's page, and she also came into the library. She took pictures, she took video. She told the staff, quote, that we were putting recruiting materials on display. The library was never tagged in the Facebook posts. We did not comment on any of the posts. My staff, of course, were watching everything that was being posted on Facebook, but they didn't comment. They didn't put anything on their personal pages or on any other social media. So at this point in my story, I'm going to name this person, not with a name, but just call her Concerned Woman, because she really took it upon herself to be the leader of this group of concerned citizens, and that's putting it mildly. She spoke at each board meeting then throughout this entire challenge. So over the next week, there were many comments posted on Facebook. Talk of a protest, of course, was mentioned. The public services manager received a text from a person that said the library display was the topic of conversation at his church on Sunday morning, and that some of the parishioners were going to let the library know about their displeasure. So this church just happens to be the church where the Concerned Woman from Facebook was a member, and where she also worked as a leader for a group affiliated with that church. The following week, I received an email from the pastor and the associate pastor of that church voicing their concerns about the display and asking for it to be taken down. The public services manager emailed both of them the same email that we had sent to the original complainants, thanking them for their concerns, attaching our collection development policy and the ALA Bill of Rights. Change slide, please. So at some point during this time, I reached out to the Indiana Library Federation because I wanted and I needed someone to talk to and to give me advice on how to proceed. The advice that I was given was to make sure that the library board and all of the library staff knew what was going on, to make sure to keep everyone informed, make sure everyone understood the library's policies, and then make some talking points for both the board and the staff if they were approached by people. So at our June library board meeting, a group of citizens led by a concerned woman and the pastor of the church attended the board meeting. They thought they could just come and speak. However, our board bylaws require anyone that wants to speak at at our public board meetings, they have to submit a form a week before the meeting to be placed on the agenda. So no one had done it, so they couldn't speak at the board meeting. But this was just the beginning. We told them that we would meet after the meeting. We were willing to speak and discuss our collection development policy. We talked with them about this, our selection process, and then we told them we also accepted recommendations of titles from the public for our collection. So throughout the month of June, library staff were asked repeatedly to take the display down. They listened to the complaints, they politely explained using some of the talking points that we had given them that it would not be taken down until the end of the month. I received a request for reconsideration for the Pride display and also received 2 petitions with 37 signatures total from citizens that wanted to express their concern and asked for the display to be taken down. So at this point, it's the end of June. We take the display down because it's the end of Pride Month. But by mid-July, I received a request, the only request for reconsideration of materials form that was submitted during this entire challenge for an actual book. And I looked at the book, I reviewed it, I made the decision. Our policy states that the director is the first one to look at the material. They make a decision and issue a statement to the patron. And then if the patron isn't satisfied, then they can go to the board with their complaint. Well, I looked at the book. It was, written by a well-educated author. I decided to keep it in the collection, and then it was in the best place where it needed to be, which was in adult nonfiction. I never heard anything back from her after that. But by mid-July, I'd received 3 requests to speak at the board meeting against the Pride display. So this is kind of what I knew, and my administrative staff. We knew that we needed to find other people to come support the library in our display. And luckily I have an awesome public services manager and an awesome youth services manager that are very involved in the community. And they made quick work of it. They found 2 people to come speak, a former library board trustee and the leader of the LGBTQ plus support friends group from our local high school. So before the July board meeting, I meet with our board president and vice president. I'm like, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. I want you to understand the bylaws and the policies and everything. We're all prepared. We're ready to go. And we walk in, and obviously the meeting was nothing like I'd ever been through or anyone on my board had ever been through before. So like Julie said, we were handed a packet of information with research and articles supporting the people who were against the display's argument. And at that time, the board made no comment. They just let the people speak, and then the president moved on with the board meeting. After the meeting, though, some of the board members were cornered in the parking lot and asked why they didn't issue a statement and confronted about the display, but they just kept reiterating that the library collects materials for everyone. They appreciated their concern, but they didn't feel that the collection development policy needed to be changed at the time. So the same group comes to our August and September board meetings, restating much of what they had already said. But during the September board meeting, the topic of conversation changed from the Pride display to the banned books display. So, but they continue to give us articles and packets about everything that they were arguing against. But by fall, the bigger group seemed to be calming down. And so at the October and November board meetings, only the concerned woman and the pastor spoke. But in October, our personnel and policy committee from the board decided that they wanted to fully review the collection development policy. They were hoping that by doing it, they would basically make the people go away because they had never issued a statement to the people who were complaining. They didn't feel like they needed to. They reviewed the policy, but only changed minor things in it. And then an email was read from a board member who was an elementary school librarian. She just spoke about the need for the library to collect materials for everyone. And then the board felt like that was enough. In December, I was told that they were giving us a break during the holiday season, and no one showed up to our board meeting. But by January 2020, Concerned Woman was the only person who spoke at our board meeting, and she spoke about obscenity in libraries. So I don't know, for those of you that have been following the legislative sessions for the past couple of years, I don't know if that phrase sounds familiar. So her argument had started to change. The context of her talking points had started to change, and the packets were shifting. And this is kind of when I learned that she was a member of Purple for Parents, and I learned about their mission through her Facebook page. So during this same January board meeting, I mentioned that I would be attending ILF's Library State House Day in February. So Library State House Day comes along. I'm excited. I'm going to meet, our legislators. I'm going to talk to them. And I get cornered by Concerned Woman because she knew I'd be there. And she was a big advocate for Purple for Parents at this point. So we had a very unpleasant conversation that ended with no resolution for either of us, and a determination, at least for me, to continue fighting for my patrons in library and others. In February 2020, no one submitted a request to speak at the board meeting. And then the following month, we were closed for COVID. So at this point, sometime during 2020, I got very lucky because Concerned Woman decided to move to Texas. And I've not heard from her since. But I'm still fighting for libraries, just on a bigger scale on ILF's advocacy committee. This whole challenge made me see the importance of advocating for libraries at the local, state, and national levels. I also learned to always be on my toes, ready for whatever might come our way. I make sure that I have open communication with our staff and library board and make sure that they are always up to date on what is happening. And I always emphasize the point that they need to understand library policies and know how to enforce them. And I think I forgot to tell Courtney to advance my slides. So now you're just going to have a blank slide. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Heather McNabb. I'm the COO Assistant Director here at EVPL. What you're seeing here is a slide that shows an ad used one time for our Drag Queen Story Hour. I'm going to admit from the start that 10 minutes is not even close to enough time for me to go through everything that happened to our library system and to our staff. So I just want to upfront admit that. I'm going to try to go through our timeline and hit a little bit of what happened. As Courtney said, we have the Q&A after. We have the roundtables coming up in a few weeks, and always happy to talk about the rest of what doesn't get in this 10 minutes. So conversations and meetings began internally between April and August of 2018. Our event was actually slated and did happen in February of 2019. We had requests from families who had seen the Drag Queen Story Hour movement happening in other US libraries. This picture that you see is actually a photo from the National Drag Queen Story Hour. We had a staff member at our EVPL North Park location who was interested and knew a local drag queen. So meetings with the then Equity and Wellbeing Officer, the North Park Manager, the North Park Assistant Manager started happening in around April, like I said, through August. And they took place over several months. In the Winter EVPL Explore Guide, which is a 3-month quarterly publication, it was published in November of 2018. We had both our Rainbow Storytime and Drag Queen Story Hour introduced. We also had a program slated for December where the Rainbow Riverbend Chorus was scheduled to sing at EVPL Central. So those were the start of what we would call these LGBTQ, but more our EDI programming that was scheduled to take place over the entire year of 2019, including several speakers. I will admit that talking points had been drafted by myself and the marketing team prior to the publication of that document. We were told to hold off on sending them, so they were not sent right from the start. At December 13th, the 2018 board meeting was the first meeting where the program was discussed. Staff member did present a year of EDI programming, including Drag Queen Story Hour. The board was supported. They did state, though, and it is in our minutes, that they would have preferred more notice prior to hearing about it just in December after it had already been published. From that point on, there were a flood of emails, calls, social media postings, and messages. In December 20th, an updated and modified talking points were sent out to all staff. They were also provided a hierarchy of communication and email addresses for key staff members who would take and respond to communications. But we did try to acknowledge that all staff would likely be talked to and questioned, whether personally or in the line of work. In late December, the staff at North Park began a notebook where they could log communications that were coming into them. The logbook was a place to record those interactions. Some staff reported afterwards that it felt like it helped customers to feel heard, but other staff didn't like giving further voice and hatred to the hatred and the vitriol that they were facing and hearing every single day. In January, protests began on site at EVPL North Park. For the most part, the protesters obeyed our solicitation policy, and most of the protests were peaceful, but they were ongoing. Every single day, we had protesters at EVPL North Park from that time until the event itself. The calls, the messages, the social media postings were never ending. And I'm going to just take a moment to say that in preparation for this, we have an internal drive where we archived all of this. I couldn't even begin to show you examples, nor would I want to on a recorded webinar of the kinds of messages that we were receiving and the words that our staff were hearing every day that were very damaging and, quite frankly, were extremely damaging even to revisit them when I was trying to prep for this webinar. The first Rainbow Storytime was also scheduled to be at North Park, and it was held in January. On that day, there were larger protests. We did have police department backup. It was not as peaceful as our regular protests, but the story time went on. Also in January, one board member resigned, another was not reappointed, and we got 2 new appointees. That's all I'll say about that. We also had a conversation type program that was scheduled to answer questions and give an overview of why Drag Queen Story Hour. We had planned that kind of a community conversation from early on in the discussions, but the event was canceled due to everything that was coming up. In January, we did also, just as Vanessa stated and Juli had said, we had people starting to show up at our board meetings as well. Our drag queen underwent training in January on how to do a story time, how to interact with children from our staff to make sure that we had checked all those. A background check was done on our drag queen. At the February board meeting, a motion was made. Oh, wait, before I go into that, in January, there were discussions about whether to cancel the program or not. Safety became a real issue. And I was very concerned for the safety of all of our staff, but specifically our EVPL North Park staff. The board was behind the event and was very supportive of us continuing to have it. And that led us to changing a little bit about what we were doing for our North Park staff. I will also say, remember, I am just giving you a timeline of the facts of what happened. This is not how I think it should have gone. I think that we definitely made mistakes, and I feel it's important to even admit that while being recorded. There are things that we should have done differently and that hopefully you will learn from in the best practices. So at the February board meeting, a motion was made by a board member to withdraw all support and all staff from the program and to formally cancel it. The motion, however, failed to carry as it was not seconded. So then we were in the final stretch. And leading up to the event itself, we had many internal meetings. The facilities manager and I met with the EPD and a leader of the SWAT team to discuss how to secure the building and the logistics for the day, especially in light of rumors of a hate group coming from Tennessee to Evansville. We did provide staff at North Park the chance to rotate into other locations if they wanted a break from all that was happening at their location. Social workers and counselors were brought in on site. Massage therapists were there for a few days, and other chances for the staff to attempt to relax or take breaks while at work. And I say attempt because even in what we could try to provide, it was nonstop for them. Leading again up to the event, that those logistics planning, communication went out about what to expect, both to people who were attending, that every child must be accompanied by an adult. So we didn't have adults trying to completely fill the room that weren't there for the actual event for children. We did allow for one journalist per media outlet to attend, and we had logistics set up for key staff members assigned to different spots within the building to observe and to keep an eye on things. We had many conversations, even public members coming in asking how many people could be in the building. And we had an inkling that perhaps people were going to try to fill the space so that we would be at capacity and not allow other people into our building to even attend the event. So now we get to February 23rd. I've only got like maybe 2 minutes left here. February 23rd of 2019. My day started at around 3:30 in the morning, and I met on site with our facilities manager and the EPD SWAT bomb squad to do a walkthrough of the building. That's something no one definitely ever teaches you in library school. Sorry. So we swept the entire site, and it was secure. The hate group was on site and had shown up overnight. They were in our parking lot by 6:30 or 7 o'clock in the morning, already using basically screaming into a system so everyone could hear their hate. Our local protesters showed up as well. We also had so many people show up in support. We had already planned to, if you look at that building, you can see the doorway. As we're looking at it here, on the right side was where our protesters stood, and on the left side and wrapped around the building were everyone who showed up to attend the event and who were in support of the event. Both sides, those two sides, were very respectful of the other side. Our local protesters actually many times were apologizing for the hate group and the speech that was being yelled at children and yelled at parents during that entire day. So we had planned for one story time. I had a contingency plan to do a second. All my contingency plans became new contingency plans immediately. I don't remember how many sessions we did, but we did one after another while trying to give our drag queen a little bit of a break between, because we had so many people show up in support, so many people who wanted their children to come and attend this event, that we were working them throughout the building. We gave out colored papers to let people know which session they were going to be in, and they were kind enough to wait and to be patient for their turn into the building, and then out of the program into another space where the kids could do some activities afterwards. The event was long, the day was long. There were many moments that brought me to tears, both from our supporters, but also honestly from our local protesters, who really were appalled, honestly, at the hate group, and said while they disagreed with what we were doing and what these parents were bringing their children to, they didn't hate the people. They didn't hate the people who were doing it, which was actually somewhat beautiful to see, that we can recognize that we can disagree and not hate people. In the following months, we had a continued community presence at our board meetings that actually continued pretty much up until COVID. And even our first ones, we had a few people that would show up, but they stopped speaking at our board meetings. We had an increased request for reconsideration, both about materials, but also about our programming. We have had increased local government interest in library operations. That has not changed since this time. We have had more questions and more challenges about what we do, how we spend our money, and our day-to-day running of the library than we ever had prior to this event. I think I've gone over on my time. Yeah, so, and I have a staff member here who just said this is hard to relive, and it is. So I will just wrap it up, but to say, no, I'm just gonna wrap it up and I'll touch on it in my best practices.
I think it's my turn now. Okay. Hi, everybody. This is Brad Sowinski, Alexandria Monroe Public Library. I titled mine Semantics with Strangers. I kind of got into like a Facebook battle with Purple for Parents and Unified Carmel and Moms for Liberty. And that's kind of what I'm going to talk about here. Just kind of going how I got here. We'll go over the groups and then the 10th juror, which I'll explain after that. The quote at the bottom, I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. I really do. I don't know how we're where we are. I still don't understand it. I feel like, are we all watching the same things? Why does it seem like groups are forming with the intent of like, destroying public schools or public libraries? It still floors me that we're talking about book banning in 2022. Oh, okay, go to the next slide, please. Okay, so how I got here. I grew up in Northwest Indiana, so like a little in Griffith, the region. My dad's motto for me, anytime I asked a question, was look it up. I don't know if that was laziness, but it actually worked. I love looking things up now. So we would go to the library, a few times a year. It wasn't I wasn't like a library regular yet. So I am a product of public education. Went to Griffith High School. That was where I got my mind blown with sociology. I had Mr. McCoy. I had to ask for permission for that class since I was a junior. And some of the topics were a little bit too mature, apparently. So my nickname in the class was Child, and everybody had to cover their ears, or I had to cover my ears while they talked about things. The reason I like sociology is that it feels like I'm an alien watching humans. It also like helped me realize how much I don't know about things. Just the ability to look objectively, at everything. It is actually liberating, I feel like. So I taught in Connorsville, down in Fayette County, for a year after college. And then I entered the library world in 2016. I was relatively ignorant to the need for diverse books and representation, in characters. And it was just something that I don't think you realize until you step into the library world that, there are all these issues like that. So the snapping point for me, if you actually want to go to the next slide, this is, this was a friend's post on the Carmel School Board's video where the parents were reading aloud. She actually agreed with it. If you see there, she wrote, I hope someone checks to see if these are in our libraries. I know her, so I asked her to please come talk with me personally. I don't understand people's desire to just put it on Facebook instead of actually going to the library and finding out, hey, are these here? I don't like this book. Can we talk about it? We're always here to listen too. That's something that I don't think the other side realizes or wants to know. I think they just want to share their opinions sometimes. Okay, the next slide, please. All right, so the three groups that I was involved with, Purple for Parents, they are dedicated to exposing the indoctrination and sexualization of children in the public education system. I went to their conference to meet these people in person because I couldn't believe that what they were saying online matches what they say in person. You'll be shocked to find that they were much nicer in person. They were just, I wasn't called a pedophile or a child pornographer or anything like that. However, online, I was. Unified Carmel, that group has actually since splintered and formed a new group out of it. And then Moms for Liberty, there are chapters in Cass County, Howard, Tipton, Boone, and Hamilton counties. So they just keep, these things just keep popping up. If you get rid of one group, like if you cut off the head, three grow back, it seems like. So, okay, yeah, next slide, please. Okay, Purple for Parents. This one, I always feel it. I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but everything on these bullet points are like conspiracy theories. They warn of the 45 goals of communism, and that like the destruction of the family is going to is part of our agenda as librarians. Claims social emotional learning is a Trojan horse for CRT. There's a picture of the giant billboard that they purchased to oppose CRT. Promotes pages like Mary in the Library, which you guys should definitely check out if you haven't. It's just a list of books that they find offensive. And from what I was arguing with them about, they seem to be the driving force behind the push to remove libraries from the exemption list, at least currently. So next slide, please. Okay, so this is my back and forth with Jennifer McWilliams, who was the former CEO of Purple for Parents Indiana. She's actually now moved on, and she does consulting for like $300 an hour about SEL. So it's just follow that money, guys. That's where it all goes. The one highlight on this one is at the bottom left, her statement there. You know, I don't want my child reading them. I'll address those issues myself. The narrative of those books is that it's normal and that it is not okay to teach my child. So I really feel like they just kind of out themselves as bigots as we go along. Also, I did want to note too, when I started going into these groups, this was on a personal, this is more personal than work related. However, I was in constant communication with my director. She knew that I was doing this. You know, I showed her, I was always respectful. That's another thing too, you know, even if you're in your personal time, we all know that you can't, you know, you still represent the library. So, okay, yeah, next slide there. Okay, so this one, I was, you know, I just call it playing the classics, bullying and name calling. On this one, let me see. Screen's on. Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, so this one, they shared a picture, and all I was trying to find out was the title and the name of the book. And they would not share it. Every time I asked about it, they would just say, "Oh, you poor sick puppy, you know, if you want to find it, you're gonna have to, you know, look on Google. Please seek help." You know, all I'm asking for is the name of the title, the author. If they know of it, it should be on Mary in the Library because it's something that they would want to ban. The second, yeah, in this second column here, the second one, have you been dreaming about this book all night? No one will feed your perversion of child pornography. I've never seen someone so possessed. Please seek help. And this is on their site too. So like, if you see too, like they usually get a lot of like, you know, thumbs ups and stuff. And if I liked going into the belly of the beast just to get, you know, just to get the first hand account, because I don't understand, I still can't wrap my head around it. And it seems to only be getting worse. So next slide then. Because with Unified Carmel, it was led by a magician who identifies as a California refugee. Just gonna let that soak in for a little bit. This group splintered earlier this year. It's now rebranded itself this month as New Tomorrow. All these people, Jennifer McWilliams, Rhonda Miller, well, Rhonda Miller is actually with Purple for Parents. Alvin Louis is the magician who identifies as a California refugee. If you see, he actually just moved to Hamilton County because California, the education system there was so terrible. And now he moved to Carmel where now he says that that's terrible. So I don't know why you would move somewhere without researching anything about it, I guess. But with New Tomorrow, let me see. Oh yeah, can you go to the next slide, please? This is another example of Alvin. This is how they speak online. And that's, so all I really did was the more questions we asked, like the more questions I would ask, I would get responses. I didn't usually want to share my opinion on things. I just wanted to find out what specifically do you not like about this book? Like hold them down and make them answer that. When they talk about George, that was one of the books in the video that they were arguing about. What specifically about that book? It's not pornographic, so why do you want it out? Like, I want you to have to say it. Like, that's it. If you don't like it and you don't agree with their lifestyle, say that. So then, you know, you're basically going to out yourself. You can't have it both ways. The reply on the right, I actually love that one. She's a stranger. I don't know who she is, and she stuck up for me. Heather, like the way that you talked about, like just reliving all this, like I was going through all these screenshots and I was like, I should have spent like the past 6 months of my life a little bit better than arguing with these people online. But like, I love it. Like it's very like worth it to me, but you know, you can get down on yourself pretty easily. Okay, I think I'm at time now. A lot of this was going to be more of the same. I totally urge all of you guys, look up this guy. Seriously, I didn't know it could get much worse than this. So Unified Carmel is now rebranded as New Tomorrow, ran by this guy, Charles Haywood. And he's apparently a conservative. He has a website where he refers to himself as the maximum leader. It's called the Worthy House. They think that January 6th was a hoax. Definitely look into this guy too. This just came out last night too. So, or like 3 days ago. This is just still all current. This is not going anywhere, even though everything worked out, you know, with 1134 and SB 17. This is still just going to keep happening. That's one of my big concerns. Actually, if you would just want to go to the last slide, the concerns one. Oh yeah, so my concerns basically are that, you know, 1134 and 17 will happen again. One of the things that I think we need to focus on is like actively battling misinformation, because it's just getting lumped in, and it's so easy for people just to fall prey to it. And if we're just silent about it and letting people go about their business, I don't know how it makes it, you know, like an issue that you believe like the misinformation. So the third part, this is just a question for everybody. The disconnect between citizens calling for removal of books on one end and then libraries conducting diversity audits, like that is on like both ends of the spectrum of like extreme, like apart from one another. I do agree with diversity audits, but I'm just wondering, what is this disconnect between people in society or people in the towns that are arguing about this, and then also, like, I mean, there's a chasm between everybody right now. So with Juror 10, I've been obsessed with 12 Angry Men for a little while now. This is the guy that I want like everybody to become, from Purple for Parents and Unified Carmel and all that. Like, I love the part where he just goes off on his big tirade and everybody just turns their back on him, and he has to learn that lesson himself. You can't force people to change a lifetime of, beliefs and ideas through like, a Facebook conversation. So on that note, don't take it personally, which leads us into our best practices. Yeah, like I don't take it personally just because, I mean, I don't know, I've been called worse. So, but one thing to kind of remember that is, make it go back to the topic. Okay, keep on point. They may not be able to control their tone, their language, their anger, but we have to be able to. If they take it personal, just keep going back to the topic, not the person. Don't, even if they're a magician and they make it very easy to make fun of them, don't do that. It will just take away from the content. So that's all I have for that. Thank you.
So Courtney, do we want to go ahead and go through the best practices?
Yes, let's go ahead and do that.
Okay, I'll start it off. Inform staff and stakeholders as soon as possible. Before I took my current position, I let them know that I'm a squeaky wheel, so they weren't not too surprised to hear from me on this immediately. It's important that your staff be included in these conversations because they're the front line. They're the ones who are answering probably 10 questions to your one. So I wanted to make sure that I provided them comfort and that they had the answers and the information that they needed to be able to handle themselves on a daily basis. Make sure that there are strong policies in place. We were kind of forced to be reactive instead of proactive. And fortunately, our policies that were in place were strong enough to support our argument, to support our side, to defend the library and the collection. So if you haven't gone through those policies recently, make sure that you go through that and invite your state folks to be a part of that, just to make sure that it's really soundproof. Have written talking points for all staff. Again, that kind of goes back to the informing your staff and making sure that they're aware of things that are okay to say, that are encouraged to say. Not just as a defender of the library, but to also make your patrons and your customers feel like their voice is being heard. So that's important as well. Advise key staff to lock down any personal social media accounts. That should be a given with any public service job. Hopefully that you're already informing your staff to do that. And then check in regularly with staff, which is something that was vital that we do at our small library, because we don't have like an EAP program. We don't have something that I can easily hand off to our staff to get additional support and guidance. So checking in with them and having those conversations was the next best thing that I could do for them. And I advise that you do that well. Talk amongst yourselves.
So have wellness and self-care plans in place. I talked a little bit about this, that we kind of were reactive as well and did a few things to hopefully help our staff that was in that location to do a little self-care. I hope that we're all in public libraries having these conversations about have wellness and self-care plans for our staff. I know that we are right now. But if you know you're going into one of these that may create literal battles, you need to have intentional conversations with staff about what is wellness and what does a self-care plan mean and who are your support people that you can go to. And sometimes that's colleagues, but sometimes it's other people outside the library. But it's very, very important that we check in with each other and that we have these wellness and self-care plans. What you've heard all of us talk about, we had a prep meeting and we have named it. It is trauma. We lived through trauma. We have lived through trauma. My staff has lived through trauma. And that's important to recognize and to acknowledge. And even when you do the best wellness and self-care, you can still create and take that on. Debrief was extremely important and should be very important. It may be one event where you bring everybody together, depending on how many staff you have. It may be multiple ones so that different people in different levels can feel heard and acknowledged in their experiences. But it's really important to debrief and to have these conversations, even though there are tears, there are emotions driven behind them, but to again listen and to know what we each went through. And then being constant communication. I know it kind of seems like we're saying the same things, but we have to say these again because constant communication is so important. You need to listen. You need to let them ask their questions. If you are not ready and willing to listen to your staff and to try to at least give them some answers, I would say definitely don't do a program. We can't, your books are your books and the displays are displays, but we have to listen to our staff and be ready. If we don't have answers for our staff, we will not have answers for the public either. But it's very important to be in continuous communication to know what they're hearing every day.
Next is learn how your staff and board are involved in the community. Like I said, and this kind of goes along with finding your supporters and stakeholders. Like I said, I have awesome staff members that were able to reach out to people in the community to quickly get them to come and speak in support of the library. It's always good to have these kinds of people on the back burner so that whenever you need them, you can call them and, they can come fight for you. I say travel in groups, as you've heard a few times. I was cornered. Sometimes it can get kind of dangerous. I think Juli talked about her car being photographed, and Heather talked about how she had to call the police, SWAT team. These are, you don't want it to become next level dangerous, but make sure that you are taking care of yourself. Try not to be cornered by these kind of groups. And then two things that we had that we thought about that didn't make it to the slide, where that Heather wanted me to mention that make sure that you reach out to other libraries that have been through this process, reach out to other librarians that have been through, that have had these kinds of challenges, because they might be able to give you some tips on how to proceed and what they've been through. I think this webinar is just a start. Also, something that really helped me to be able to do this presentation was to document. I documented as much as I could. I have, all the, like Brad had all the Facebook screen grabs and all that kind of stuff. I documented everything. And like they said, going through this process has been quite eye-opening because I kind of pushed it in the back. But when you document everything, I always felt like that I was doing the right thing, but I just wanted to have everything there so that I could say to my board, this is what we have been doing. This is what we're facing. So.
Hi, my name is Cheri Harris, and I am the Certification Program Director and a legal consultant for the Indiana State Library. Boy, it's a rough transition to go from what you've been hearing to talking about the law. I just want to, as you just heard, these issues can be very draining, and I kind of encourage you to tap into and stoke yourself up and draw energy from the very meaning of your work. From where I sit, I see your library, and I really mean each of your libraries in the locations where they are, as opposed to a theoretical library, as being a crucial instrument of democracy and education, as well as an opportunity for lifelong learning. So I'm speaking from an Indiana perspective, and my usual disclaimer is this is legal information provided for educational purposes. My goal is to provide information about the law, but not legal advice. If you have a legal problem, you should consult your library's attorney. Next page. So this is what the First Amendment actually says. The parts of it that are key here are really the idea of Congress can't make a law abridging the freedom of speech. This language is applied to the states through the 14th Amendment, which says no state shall make and enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. I'm going to start pretty quickly, but I'm planning to slow down a little bit when I get to the meaty part. So this is kind of my background review. I've done other programs that cover a fair amount of First Amendment information that go into this in more depth. Excuse me. I will say that there is absolutely a lot of law out there that says part of what the First Amendment means is it protects the right to receive information. So even though it talks about speech, it goes beyond that. Next slide. The Indiana Constitution has a different version, a different Bill of Rights than the Federal Bill of Rights. And personally, I find this framing that no law should be passed restraining the free interchange of thought and opinion to be a little bit more expansive than the way the First Amendment is written, which theoretically could provide a more expansive law, but that's not really something that we've seen in Indiana. But the right that's guaranteed there is spelled out a little differently. So that's why I bring that up. Next slide. So just to try and ease into this with some general observations about speech that is regulated by government. You've got a legal standard there, a significant government interest in determining what that interest is. You can sometimes inject part of your mission or your purpose into that, is the regulation narrowly tailored, and does it provide ample alternative channels to receive information? And that point is specifically interesting because that is part of the difference between how these cases come down for schools, which there are a lot of cases for schools, but about removals from schools. There are fewer cases out there, published opinions out there on removals from public libraries. But part of the difference is that when a school removes an item, they can say it's still available from your public library. But when the public library removes the item, it's going to have a much bigger impact. So that's sort of part of the key between viewing these cases. Okay, so next slide. I'm trying to go quickly because I know you still want time for questions, and that's really important too. So obviously, everyone talks about needing to make sure you have a good policy in place and that people understand it and know what it says. So I just wanted to touch on what makes a policy a good policy. And the first is absolutely that it has to be in writing and also clearly worded so people understand it. By equally enforced, I like to ask the question, will you be required when applying this policy to treat your friends the same way as you would treat strangers, so that it comes out the same way regardless of who it is that is being regulated under the policy. Reasonable penalties includes an appeal process that may be informal. It doesn't require the whole board for the first round of process there. It could be just explaining your situation to a supervisor is a step between being asked to leave the library and being told you have to leave the library. And then for notice, the way I described this is well advertised. Like once you have a good policy in place, it's not going to help you very much unless it's well advertised. So in order for people to follow your rules, they have to know what they are. Okay, next slide. Not all speech is protected, and these are the three categories of, these are three of the categories that are not protected speech, not protected by the First Amendment. And for the most part, these are issues that would be addressed in state law rather than state criminal law is, and there is variation among the states as to how those criminal laws read and what exceptions they may have. I want to skip the next slide and go on. That was just the obscenity standard, which I'm okay. So this case, 1980, and I saw we have someone here from Warsaw, and I would love to know if you remember this, Anne, and if you have what your thoughts are on this. But anyway, this is an Indiana case. In 1975, 3 school board members tried to remove several books that one of the commentaries I saw said were determined to be objectionable by a politically conservative organization, which that fact in and of itself can factor into how the outcome is, because is it viewpoint discrimination? Is it content discrimination? The fact that it's an organization that wants to get rid of it, as opposed to somebody speaking from an educational perspective. Anyway, so in this case, the court took issue with the fact that these changes that the school board wanted to make did not deprive plaintiffs of all contact with the material, because the court didn't proscribe these books or classes from all of citizenry. They just decided not to include them in the curriculum or the school library. In other words, what they're saying is this is not a total ban. I guess I probably forgot to mention on my slide that showed the standards for regulating speech, but the last thing on that slide says, by definition, a ban is not narrowly tailored. So when one of the prongs is it narrowly tailored, a complete ban is not going to be narrowly tailored because it doesn't leave open alternative channels. But here in Indiana, the court is saying, well, if you can get it anywhere in the world, if somebody can get it somewhere in the world, then it's not a complete ban. So just trying to contrast a little bit where the Indiana courts have, at least on this occasion, come out on these things. Anyway, they said it's okay for a local school board to make educational decisions based on personal, social, political, and moral views, as long as it doesn't impose a pall of orthodoxy. They also commented that there's a very high threshold for the students who brought this suit to begin to make a constitutional claim that's suitable for federal court litigation, which to me sounds a little bit like we don't want to hear it. Okay, next slide. So that was in 1980. 2 years later, the US Supreme Court came down with a pretty major case on removal from school districts. And they came at it a little bit differently in that they tried to contrast a decision to remove material because of a disagreement with the ideas expressed in it versus a decision to remove material based on its educational suitability. And that court said local school boards may not remove books just because they dislike the ideas in those books and seek to prescribe what is orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion. Okay, so here's where it gets a little bit interesting, I think. A dissenting opinion in this US Supreme Court case said, I saw that Warsaw, that case of Zicon v. Warsaw, and I agree with it completely. So just to try and show you what the spectrum is between those two cases, the dissenting opinion in Island Trees agreed with the Indiana Seventh Circuit Court ruling. So to summarize that distinction, the Indiana ruling gives more leeway to school boards than the US Supreme Court does. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about a case that I unfortunately don't have a slide for, which I probably should because it's kind of goes to the essence of what most of you probably want to hear about, which is the difference between a school library and a public library under First Amendment law, looking at removal cases. One difference is that when something is removed from a school, the court likes to point out that the school acts as in loco parentis, or in other words, parents are sending their kids to school. They have to send them to school. And while they're there, the school has to protect them in some ways as a parent would. And also that when it comes to an evaluation of whether or not something should be in a school, it's being offered just to a group of young people through the school, not to people of all ages. So in some ways, schools can remove things and should be able to remove things under an easier standard than a public library, than the public library should be, as opposed to in public libraries where there is an assumption that the actual parent can have as much parental involvement as they like in helping their child select and determine what information is appropriate. So there was a case in 2000 called Sund v. City of Wichita Falls. This was a Texas case, and it feels like a really important case to me, but it is only a district court opinion. So it is not precedent here in Indiana because it's not in our jurisdiction. But the case did say that children have First Amendment rights, even young children, and that it's, well, okay, so before I go into that more detail, I want to add that the standard in general for public libraries is that unless the content violates state criminal laws on obscenity, child pornography, or material harmful to minors, the test is strict scrutiny. The Sund case said that restriction or removal has to be necessary to achieve a compelling state interest and narrowly tailored to achieve that interest. In Sund, the city council, passed a resolution that allowed a petition signed by 300 library card holders to determine whether a book in the children's section had to be moved to the adult section. And the Texas District Court held that that was completely unconstitutional in violation of the First Amendment rights of both the parents and the children. And that case, by the way, was over the books, Heather Has Two Mommy and Daddy's Roommate, or Daddy Has a Roommate. Anyway, there was also the suggestion here, or the ban in Texas started as a particular church's interest in getting these materials removed, and prior to going the route of getting the city to adopt the resolution, the minister of the church had checked out all copies of the books and refused to return them. So in the decision of is the reason here content restriction versus educational value, that would be evidence that shows that it's based on the content and not on the educational value. Okay, next slide. And I'm sure I'm out of time. So this, I just want to mention, this doesn't have to do with libraries or removal of books, but this is a case, Indiana case, that was handed down by the Court of Appeals here last week. And I think it has, okay, great, thanks. I think it has some relevance to the discussion in that, so this is a case where a former band director texted numerous memes of a sexual nature to one of his students, and the state charged him with disseminating matter harmful to minors. What I think is really interesting about this case is that it shows there are three different opinions, three judges on a Court of Appeals case, and there are three different opinions. And It shows how the courts are wrestling with these issues now. It seemed in this case that all three judges would easily have agreed that the memes that the adult sent to the child were tasteless, but they didn't agree whether they are patently offensive by community standards or even what those phrases mean anymore, which that's what the obscenity slide that I passed would have done, is pointed out that patently offensive and community standards are part of the definition of what is obscenity. I think if I just said offensive, I meant obscenity. Anyway, okay, so the majority opinion, which was interestingly enough written by former Chief Justice Shepard, formerly Chief Justice of the Indiana Supreme Court, who is now acting as a senior judge on the Court of Appeals, that said whether these memes are patently offensive by community standards is a question of fact for trial, and that the parties should provide evidence of whether and in what way the internet and social media platforms have altered the community standard on this subject. That's what the majority said. The second opinion was a concurring opinion, but that raised issues about the particular language of whether or not something is suitable for minors, and the fact that this was in a criminal context, and that what is patently offensive by community standards might be different than in a criminal context when you're talking about jeopardizing a person's freedom over an exercise of speech and whether or not that speech is free. Anyway, that second opinion also said most minors have unfettered access to social media, and then basically said, by the way, what did the state constitution mean by abuse of freedom? That's what we should be, abuse of the freedom of speech, that's what we should be talking about. The dissenting opinion here said this case starkly illustrates that the law has not caught up with the internet age, which has expanded our definition of community to the far reaches of the world. So that point is whether a community standard is still even relevant, I think, if the community is the world rather than your neighborhood. And then she says the majority laments this cultural shit wrought by the internet, but fails to acknowledge what it means to be patently offensive under the standard we use to evaluate today. And she points out that in 1957, Elvis Presley's hips were considered patently offensive, and that in 1985, 60 Minutes ran an episode called Is Dungeons and Dragons Evil? And that parents were worried about whether that game had morally degrading effect on youth. And she described these concerns as now being quaint. I want to skip the next slide. And I want to just say that I have a sort of fascination with how stories can sometimes be told in a quote, in a headline. And that I came across this headline when I was doing research for this program. And then I want to close where I started with another word about how important your work is, and that as guardians of intellectual freedom and champions of the right to read, my hat is off to you, those who spoke, especially, sharing your experience, and those who haven't spoken, but hopefully will have an opportunity to speak in the next 10 minutes and or at the panels, the roundtables that we're holding next week. Done.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. This is the end of the presentation, so we'll go ahead and stop the recording.